Just like the ancestral diet is so different from the standard American diet, so the ways our ancestors birthed bears very little relation to how modern industrialised communities bring the next generation into the world. In this intimate episode, originally recorded for patrons of the podcast, Andrea and I share our birthing stories. We've got 4 births between us, and we came to them with very different backgrounds. We talk about the actual births, the run-up to them, what we learnt from them, what we regret, and much more. There is so much to learn from how one approaches birth. We hope this episode encourages and inspires you whether you're planning to birth soon or not.
Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen podcast with Allison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen. Hello, Allison.
Hello, Andrea. You're coming over loud and clear. That's great. I just bashed the microphone.
Good. That's awesome. This is awesome to be recording again. We haven't recorded in a little while.
Indeed. So tell me the last thing you ate. I'm always interested.
I made 2 fried eggs, a cup of broth, and a cup of coffee with cream. So pretty simple.
Delicious.
Pretty good.
Mm-hmm. That sounds
How about
nice. You? Meatballs. Thanks to Ira's post on Discord. She inspired me to do a massive batch of meatballs, and I wanted to keep it egg free so Gabriel could have them. And so instead, I used liver pate to bind them, and I think we made about 120 of these meatballs. I couldn't fit them in. I couldn't fit them in the oven. It was just it's almost a disaster. Anyway, so I've got meatballs everywhere. So we had some meatballs, and I made a sauce with lardo and onion and leek and broccoli and chard and tomato paste and stock. And I'm sure there was something else, but I've forgotten garlic. And then I toasted some bread, some sourdough, put the meatballs on the top and poured the veggie sauce over the top of it. Very good.
You know, I was going to say, I thought I saw Ira just made meatballs, but now you got me thinking when I head upstairs after this, I'll get some meat out of the freezer. I just got out one of my containers of pate yesterday, trying to go through it all because I need to make more because I have so many livers in my freezer right now.
It's a great use of pate.
I don't think I ever thought I've gotten really into the habit of putting pate in everything, but I don't think I've ever thought about putting it in meatballs.
It's really it gives them a kind of a depth of flavour that you're not really sure where it comes from, but it tastes nice, you know?
Yeah.
So,
I'm excited.
there we go. You can go and make some meatballs with pate. Ira has inspired us. Meatball production in industrial quantities.
Meatball factory.
Exactly. If you're into ancestral eating, you'll know that liver is a superfood, full of vitamin A, K, and a whole host of B vitamins, plus many essential minerals. It has a truly exceptional nutrient profile and is a staple of traditional healthy diets. But it's not always as easy to get liver into our lives as we want. Getting a good supply, knowing how to cook it so it actually tastes good, and getting all of our family to eat it. These things can be hard, especially when we're busy or travelling. That's where Andrea and I turn to liver capsules. They give us the incredible benefits of liver without having to worry about the sourcing, the preparation, or the eating. One Earth Health produces organ capsules from 100% grass-fed New Zealand-raised cattle. As a podcast listener, you can get 5% off and free shipping by using the link oneearthhealth.com/ancestral kitchen. And each time you order, you'll also be supporting us to keep on making the podcast. Details and the link are in the show notes. So we've got quite a lot to talk about today, I think. So Patreon questions. I wanted to start with Deb's question because I think it's shorter than Zara's question. So Deb says, I have a question about the fat on top of your bone broth after it cools. Do you keep it and heat it back in, or do you remove it to, as some would do, get rid of excess fat? I always think it's the good fat and I keep it in my bone broths. Thanks, Deb. So I replied to her on Patreon, but I think it's a good thing to cover. And I just said you do the same as me, and I'm hoping I wasn't wrong. Tell us what you do with your fat.
So wait, so specifically before I start the bone broth or like after it's cooked?
After it's cooked.
Okay. Yeah, so it depends on how much fat there is. Sometimes there's not very much. If it's just some chicken carcasses and I didn't put any skin in or anything, there's sometimes not really very much fat. So I just kind of shake it back in. But if there's a nice thick cap of fat, either it stays on the broth because I need it to help preserve the broth in my refrigerator, or I break it and kind of, I don't know, lift it off and I'll put it in another jar. Usually I heat it and melt it back down into another jar. And then I have a jar of broth for, I don't know, frying eggs or putting on bread or whatever.
Your jar of fat. Yeah. So basically your snap to me, if there's a nice amount, when I'm using my broth, I just spoon a bit of the fat in with the broth that I've taken out of the container. Because we rarely use a whole jar of broth at one time, a whole, litre, which should be caught for you. We usually use it in like half of that at a time.
Okay.
Sometimes if there's a massive block of it, I will do what you do. I take it off, but I don't heat it back down. I just put it in a bowl in the fridge and then just use it, cut a bit off and just use it. So we basically do the same thing. But what I did say to Deb on Patreon was what you've just said, which is if you keep that fat cap on the broth in the fridge, it helps preserve it because the oxygen can't get to it. So that's another added bonus. Yeah, don't get rid of it.
Yeah.
Don't get rid of it.
Yep.
I
think I figured out why the fan on this computer is going. Hold on. There's a program running in the background that is.
How dare it? Does it know we're recording?
How dare they? Let me see if I close this, if it shuts the fan off. Hopefully somebody.
I can't hear the fan, but I bet the microphone can hear it because it has
yeah,
better hearing than me.
I haven't heard on any of our recordings, but I've recorded some other things and it's picked up the fan.
Okay.
But okay, I closed it. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
Anyways, otherwise, sorry for the fan background.
We'll see when it comes through. So that's Deb's question. Thank you, Deb, for your question. And Zara's question is basically, I think, going to be the rest of the episode. So what I want to do is read out her question, which is in 2 parts, and then we'll see where we go from there. Okay?
Yeah.
So She said, I know you both have talked a bit about birth in previous podcasts, but I wondered if you would feel comfortable sharing your full birth stories and what you chose to do, not to do, and why. Also, Andrea, since you have multiple children, is there anything you did different after your first birth? Were both of your partners on board with your choices around pregnancy, birth? And do you have any advice for people whose partners may feel sceptical or resistant to ideas like home, free births, natural while pregnancy, etc.? I know that's technically a bunch of questions, not one, but I hope it's not too much. And then she added on a second comment, I guess I also, in an addendum to the last question, are there any books or articles, research that either of you read that you would recommend? So it's been a really nice question, Zara, because we haven't actually shared our birth stories, and yet we haven't even shared them with each other, even though we have talked about bits of them with each other. We know bits.
Yeah.
And I spent some time this morning going back through the notes that my midwife gave me after Gabriel's birth, and it was just wonderful to go back. Wonderful to go back to them. I loved being pregnant, and I really enjoyed, for want of a better word in the English language, my birth. So thank you for the question. How do you want to organise this, Andrea? Because you've got 2 more kids than me, so you may have more to say than me.
Let's start with yours because let's hear your birth because I want to hear your story. I'm just really curious to hear about it. And you just were reading it when we started. So it's very, very, very fresh for you, obviously. So let's start with you. Why don't you go?
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Have you got a cup of tea?
just start with your story,
your
and
feet
maybe
up?
then we can try to tackle some of the questions, and then I
Yeah.
don't have to share 3 full birth stories, but
Okay.
yeah.
Because Zara's asking why why we made certain decisions or didn't make certain decisions, I kind of wanted to go back a bit to the pregnancy, because what happened during the pregnancy obviously informed the birth. So podcast listeners know that I was without a cycle for a long time, and then my cycle came back, and I wasn't expecting to get pregnant, and then suddenly I realised, surprisingly, that I was pregnant. We were living in Italy at the time, and I was 39. I knew at that point that I didn't want to go to a hospital. I didn't want a standard birth. I didn't want any scans at all. Rob and I have been following an alternative lifestyle for almost a decade at that point. And I didn't want to go to hospital at all. There was just no question. I wanted to have the birth at home. But there is absolutely no history of that in my family, and I didn't have any friends who'd home birthed. I was born in a hospital and bottle fed. My sister had her children in a hospital, and she'd already had 3 children at that point. And the first one was the only one that I was in England for. The other ones I was in Italy. And she had a terrible birth for her first child. She was in labour for 2 days. When I went to see her, she looked like she'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. She was sick during labour. She was stitched. She had to have suction put on the baby's head. It was just, she really didn't have a very good birth at all.
Oh my word.
And yeah, none of my friends that I knew had home birthed. I knew absolutely no one. I'd never been around births either, not like you. You know, when we come to your story, it's very different. I'd never seen a child being birthed. My best experience of birth was from television and stories. I'd never seen a child being born.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And yeah, I knew I didn't want to go into hospital. So it was a challenge navigating the kind of process. So first of all, we tried to find a midwife in Italy, because I thought, well, if I'm not going to hospital, I would like someone to come to my home and help me through the birth, because I don't have much experience of birthing. And Rob and I, a very memorable day, Rob and I found a midwife who worked at a special birthing centre on the hills somewhere in Tuscany, and we went to see her and spoke to her about the birth. And one of the questions she asked me was, when was your last period? And I said, well, I haven't had regular periods. I've had 1 period, and then I haven't had periods for 5 years before that. And so I don't actually know when my cycle was or when I got pregnant. I don't know anything that I can give you with concrete at all. And she said, oh, okay, so, well, that's okay, because we can tell from the scans when you're due. And I was like, I don't want any scans. I don't want to go to a hospital at all. And she said, well, I have to be able to induce you at 42 weeks if you haven't given birth. And so unless I know when your due date is, I won't be able to induce you when the law says I have to induce you. And so I can't take you on. I'm sorry, unless you have scans. And that was a blow that I was not expecting, because I loved being in Italy. I did not know. And she then said, and you won't find a midwife in Italy who will take you on. And so
yeah, she's probably right.
And I was like, right, okay, so what does that mean? And over the next 24 hours, I was like, well, that means we have to go back to England, because I'm not going to a hospital to have this child.
Word.
And I want someone with me, so if something goes wrong or something happens that I'm not experienced with, there's due diligence, there's care. So then Rob, I was really upset because the thought of leaving Italy just sent me into a complete spin. Rob found a midwife who lived near his mum in Kent in England and phoned her to talk to her to say, look, this is what this Italian midwife said. Is that can she really say that? Is that really true? What's the situation in England? And this is an independent midwife. And she said, no, that's just, you shouldn't be treated like that. If you were to come and I was to look after you, I would be fine with you not having any scans. I would be fine with not knowing when your due date was. We would talk about, if you went overdue in what we think overdue was, we would talk about how you felt. And if you wanted to be induced, then I could organise that for you. But I don't like to induce women because I think the baby comes when it wants to come. And so I'm not going to force you into any form of induction. And there are lots of other things we can do to get things moving along. And so that, when we found out that, I thought, well, yeah, we have to leave this. We have to leave this country because I'm not going into hospital and I'm not having anyone with my birth. And so I think that was about end of August. We left Italy in October. So it took us a couple of months to kind of close everything up. We had nowhere to live in the UK, so we moved in with Rob's mum in a very small house on the outskirts of London, which was a challenge. The whole thing for me was just a big letting go because I didn't want to leave the country. That Italy was my home. I didn't want to go and live with Rob's parents, Rob's mum. I didn't want to go back to my parents. I felt that Rob's mum would give us a better place. And just sort of lots of little things. One of the main things is that my parents smoke. And I thought, well, I don't want to be in a smoky house when I'm pregnant. Anyway, so we went home and we used savings that we had to engage this midwife because I thought, it was very, very, very important to me that we had someone who knew what they were doing at the birth. And before that, I'd discovered or found out about something called hypnobirthing, which is a kind of a form of two sides to it, really. One is breathing, a set of breathing techniques, which you learn to help you be able to easily recall them during labour. And the other side of it is teaching you that birth is a natural process and trying to go and get you to understand over and above all the loud shouting from everywhere else that birth is painful and has to be done in hospital and needs special equipment.
Right.
Hypnobirthing teaches you that birth is normal and your body is capable of doing this, and it gives you a practice to do every day with breathing and other practices to do with your body and with kind of psychological meditation. So I did an online course on hypnobirthing. And then I practiced it every single day of my pregnancy, literally from the day that the 2 days after I found out I was pregnant and I found it, every day I did the hypnobirthing meditation. Every day I practiced the hypnobirthing breathing. And in addition, at the time, I was just finishing off my yoga teaching qualification, which I was doing with an ashram and 2 American teachers who lived by me in Italy. And I chanted every day. One of the teachers is a quite well-known Kundalini yoga singer called Sadhasat Kaur, and she has lots of albums. And I would chant every day 2 particular Kundalini chants. And so I was doing a lot of kind of internal stuff, put all my faith in that hypnobirthing and enjoying the practices of the breathing, enjoying the chanting, enjoying everything. I carried that on when we went back to the UK and we met the midwife. I started going to a birth yoga, pregnancy yoga class. And at the beginning, that went quite well. I enjoyed the yoga. But a lot of the ex-students kept coming back to talk about their births. And they'd all gone to hospital. They'd all kind of had the intention to birth at home and then ended up going to hospital and talking about, I remember one of them talking about the epidural she had.
Oh my.
And I said to the teacher, this is not a positive thing for me. I'm coming to the class when I've sort of saturated myself in hypnobirthing and chanting, and I'm hearing stories of people who've gone to hospital. And she said, "Oh, just put your headphones in when they come." And I thought, hey, I can't do that. Someone's up there talking. I can't put my headphones in. So I stopped going to the pregnancy yoga class because unbelievably it was kind of making me less confident in what I was trying to do.
Oh, yeah. That stuff gets in your head. We should never underestimate the theology that we're absorbing.
It's supposed to be a pregnancy yoga class, so for home birthing, and it just...
Yeah.
It made me think, no, I have to just focus on me, the space I'm creating at home, Rob. And what I did find was in the UK at the time, there was a kind of a birthing buddy matching scheme where you could reach out and they would put you in touch with a lady who'd birthed at home, and then you could email them. And so I had 2 ladies who were English who'd birthed at home, and I just emailed them back and forth, asking questions, learning what they'd done, learning what it was like. And that was an absolute godsend, a blessing, because I met people. You know, I actually got to ask them the questions that I wanted to, and I got to learn there, which was nice.
Did you know we have a Patreon for the listeners of the Ancestral Kitchen podcast? That's right, can't get enough of this? Well, there's more of it over on the Patreon feed, just waiting for you. We have a variety of levels to choose from and a bunch of different benefits to enjoy. Your sponsorship keeps the podcast on the air ad-free and helps us keep buying books to read and talk about on the podcast. And also helps Allison buy bizarre ingredients at the farmer's market so she can ferment them and tell us about them later. Check us out at patreon.com/Ancestral Kitchen Podcast.
We decided quite early that I wanted to birth in water because I love water and I love warmth. And so we started looking around for a kind of a pool, a birthing pool, and got that all organised. Everything was going fine with the midwife. I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't have any scans. The pregnancy was wonderful. I felt amazing. And I loved being pregnant. I loved having a big belly. I was energetic up until about the last month when I think I pulled a muscle in my stomach and I struggled to walk. I was walking every day. A few little problems with my back. I'm hypermobile, so things like that kind of tend to happen. But I really loved being pregnant, everything about it. And Rob was extremely supportive of everything that I wanted to do. There was kind of no question about it. When we travelled back from Italy to England, we didn't want to fly because of the X-ray, kind of, the radiation on the flight. Just like for the same reason we didn't want scans. We didn't want scans because of the radiation that comes with the scans.
Right.
And we also didn't want scans. I hadn't thought about this until now because when Rob researched it, it became clear that if they found out that something was wrong with the baby, they couldn't actually do anything about it to make it better. All they could do was tell us there was something wrong with the baby, and then we could choose whether we wanted to abort or not. And we decided together as a couple that whatever way the baby came out, we wouldn't want to abort if we knew that information. And so the scans kind of seemed useless to us because there was nothing that they were going to tell us that would change what we were doing in any way, shape or form. And it also seemed like, friends who I'd known who had scans kind of just got worried about everything. Going into hospital, anxiety, is it going to say that, it says this, I'm not sure, I've got to do this. And it's pretty much like having... we haven't talked about this really in the podcast, but, cervical smears and mammograms and that kind of thing. Right. The anxiety around the whole process has a big impact on one's psychology and one's state of mind, I think. So that's another reason why we didn't do scans.
100%.
So Rob did all the research to try and get us back to England on the train because we didn't want to fly. We'd never gone back to Italy, from Italy to England on the train, and it cost 4 times as much as the plane. But it was really exciting. We went up to Florence and to Milan, and then we went into Switzerland, and then we stayed overnight in Switzerland, and then we went to Paris, and then we went under the English Channel to the south coast of England, and then by train to Rob's mum's house, which was it was snowy and amazing, and Rob carried everything, and I was just with this big kind of belly, and it was really nice. It felt really good to be consciously choosing to go on the train rather than flying.
Yeah.
So I'm conscious of time. I shall hurry up. So the pregnancy went really well.
No, I love it. Don't hurry.
Oh, thank you. And I'd kind of tried to figure out when Gabriel was due based on the one period that I'd had before I got pregnant, and when I'd noticed my temperatures changing, because I was charting my temperature at the time because I'd been doing that in order to try and get my cycle back. So I'd carried on with it. So I could see potentially when I'd ovulated before I had the kind of missing period because I was pregnant. So I kind of worked out he was due on the 14th of April. And I remember writing in my diary about kind of February or March, and I wrote down the 14th of April, and then I wrote down the 21st, and I wrote down the 7th as well. And I drew a ring around the 7th in pencil because I just kind of thought, I feel like he's going to be born on the 7th. And then on the 6th of April, I went into labour. And it started about lunchtime. I was just at home in Rob's mum's house. I was actually making some sweet potato falafel, and I started feeling kind of really gentle contractions. And it took about 2 hours for me to think, hang on, I think this is labour. Rob had a friend over and was kind of chatting and playing some music with him. And I just kind of carried on moving around a bit and staying comfortable. By about midnight, it was clear that my contractions were coming a lot quicker and were a lot stronger. And so we shut off the front room in the house, and we had the curtains were drawn. I had candles, which I'd planned.
You shut off the what?
We shut off the room. The room has like a divider in it, so we just sort of shut both the doors. So I was in kind of a confined space. We drew the curtains. I had some music, which I'd used during all the kind of hypnobirthing sessions and all the singing that I'd done. And so we put that on. I remember we bought bananas for me to just kind of munch on a bit during labour, and I had lots of water. I read that in the notes, how many times I drank water. And then I just focused on the breathing that I'd learned and that I'd done, for the whole 9 months, every single day. And because I'd done it every single day, it just came to me very, very easily in that moment.
Yeah.
And we called the midwife, and she sort of said, when the contractions are this far apart, give me another call. And the night went on and on, and she came about 5 a.m. the next day, and she was incredible. She literally just sat in the corner and didn't do anything to change the energy that was in the room. She was very quiet. When I needed her, she was there, and she was monitoring what was happening in a very non-invasive way. That went on. My contractions got stronger and closer together. At about 8:30, the pool was ready. It took a long time to fill the pool, and in retrospect, we should have probably started a bit earlier. Didn't realise it was so big. But at about 8:30, the pool was ready, and I got in it, and I remember very distinctly how absolutely delicious that was. It made a huge difference to me to be in the water and have that warm water around me. It's like all my muscles kind of just went, oh, thank you. So that was about 8:30 in the morning. And then things just kind of carried on. I carried on with the breathing. Sometimes I had a drink, sometimes I had a bit of banana. The music was on. Rob was there with me all the time, holding my hand. I was squeezing his hand when I had contractions. The big thing about hypnobirthing is that there's no pushing, so it's kind of the opposite of what you see on television in births, where someone's screaming at the mum, push. Hypnobirthing teaches you don't need to push. Your body has expulsion forces within it, and if you can relax enough to allow the uterus to do its job, it will push the baby out without you needing to put any downward force on your body.
Yep.
So I didn't push. I just carried on with the breathing. And it went on. And I remember getting to the point probably a few hours later than that, like 11:30, 12, thinking, I don't know how much longer I can do this. And I think that was really, I'd been awake all night. I'd been awake for like 24 hours at that point. And it was intense. And I just remember thinking, I hope the baby comes soon. The midwife looked with a mirror and saw the head, just as when I was thinking, I don't know if I can carry on as much. I guess there is a point that they say during labour where you just, I forget what it's called, like the break or the bridge transition. Or something. Transition. I think that's when I had that thought. And the midwife looked.
Your darkest hour.
Exactly. She looked underneath of the mirror and she said, I can see the head. And the water was still intact, so my waters hadn't broken. So she could see just a little bit of the head. And then, the last kind of sort of contraction, I remember I made a noise at that point. I'd been quite quiet through most of the time up till then. And then I made a very loud noise. And Gabriel's head was birthed. And then his body just slipped out. I didn't really need to do anything else. I picked him up and put him on my skin. And Rob was right there. He was Gabriel was screaming. I think he was cold. and the midwife in the notes put Gabriel screamed in brackets very loudly, ! Close bracket.
That is a reassuring sound in a newborn, though.
Yeah.
And it's good. You're like, okay, lungs are clear.
He stayed with me for, I don't know how long it was, a few minutes, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. I got out of the water, went onto the sofa. I went into the toilet after that, and the midwife came with me, and I sat on the toilet, and the afterbirth came out, the placenta, and then I hadn't been able to go to the loo, I don't think, for about 20 hours. And I went to the loo. I went did a wee, because that had all been I stopped because what was happening was more important. And then I just stayed on the sofa with Gabriel. And I gave birth to him at 19 minutes past 1. I looked in the notes. So my labour was 25 hours.
Wow.
The only thing I regret from it, I would have to say, is that the midwife was keen to use an electronic device to test the heartbeat of the baby. Before and during her visit, she'd been using stethoscope to hear the heartbeat, to see it was fine. But it was very difficult for her to use a stethoscope in the water, and my position was difficult for her to do that. And she wanted to use a Doppler, I think it's called, the machine. And I said yes, because I wanted to hear my baby's heartbeat. But that was the only electronic equipment we used during the whole process. And in hindsight's a great thing, isn't it? I wish that she hadn't used it. I knew that Gabriel was kicking during the process. I felt him kicking during, several points during the labour. But it reassured me, which must have done something for my hormones and in turn my muscles. Right. But I wish we hadn't done that.
It's true.
Yeah. But apart from that, it just was a wonderful birth. Considering everyone around me just thought it wasn't going to happen. People said that to us. My parents just, every time I mentioned the birth, they didn't talk to me. Rob's mum made sure she had the route to the hospital, because she had a car, all kind of mapped out, and she was being prepared, but she was expecting to have to put me in the car and take me to the hospital. And Rob said to me, I think several weeks before the birth, which ended up being on the 7th, which was freaky a little bit, perhaps. Rob said to me, trust in what we've done. You don't have any experience with this. You haven't seen it before, but look at the work we've done over the last decade to change our life. Look at all the things we've brought forth. Look at all the challenges we face together, and trust in the work you've been doing the last 9 months. Trust in all the work you've done before that to get you to this point. It will see you through. And he's right, it did. Together, it was a very nice experience for us and hopefully for Gabriel too. Which I feel proud of, because I don't obviously remember, but I don't think my birth was particularly good for me. I was born in a hospital. I was a forceps delivery. My mother was in labour for a long, long time, and I don't think it was a pleasant experience for her or for me. Whereas I can say with a lot of affection that it was a really empowering and beautiful experience for me, and hopefully it was something that I've given to Gabriel, that he will never, that's always part of him,
Yeah.
Made tons of mistakes since then, but hey ho.
Yeah, we'll save those for later. We're a really good parent before our babies are born.
Yeah. So there we go.
Hey, you washing the dishes. Been there. You've heard Allison and I talk over and over about her love of rye sourdough bread. Well, I might actually call it an obsession, but that's neither here nor there. Now you can make Allison's rye sourdough in your own kitchen with her as your teacher. And she's a really good teacher. Rye is economical, it's delicious, and full of nutrients and low in gluten. There's a reason why it has been a darling of bread bakers for centuries. Make it into sourdough, as Allison will show you in her course, Rye Sourdough Bread, Mastering the Basics. And you've got an amazing, tasty, and nutritious staple in your kitchen. It's traditional and it's nutritional. In this course, you'll learn everything there is to know about how she creates and maintains her rye sourdough starter, all about whole grain sourdough rye, including the key differences between baking with rye and wheat, how to make 2 loaves, an everyday rye sandwich bread, and a delicious Russian-style dark rye loaf, and what to do with your sourdough discard, including video walkthroughs for sourdough pancakes and a tasty, sweet, spiced cake. Head to www.ancestralkitchen.com/rye.
Go.
And what do you, it sounds like Rob and Gary are so similar in these things, in that I would use the same words as you said. There was no question. If I said, this is how we're going to do the birth related thing, Gary says, yeah,
Of
I
course.
know you do your research, and I know that you know what your body needs and everything. So it sounds like Rob didn't question, but I've heard people say things like, oh, my husband or my partner or whatever doesn't want me to do the, midwife birth because she's 40 minutes away, or she's too far away for the appointments or something. And I'm thinking, you guys literally had to, leave your country. That's a pretty big step. That's a lot of trust for Rob.
It was very challenging. With hindsight, again, we kind of needed to leave. We needed that shake up. We didn't have things set up properly to be working in this country. We needed the shake up that it gave us, but it felt like a real wrench for me to leave the place that I was in love with, but there was just no question. I feel like the thing about the midwife being far away, we called the midwife, and the midwife said, you're not far enough along yet, call me when your contractions are like this.
Uh-huh.
And she wasn't from the town where we lived. It took her 25, 30 minutes to drive to us. Even, in the middle of the night, she came out at, 5 o'clock in the morning. And she was able to judge when she needed to be there based on what I was telling her as to what was happening with my
Hmm.
contractions. So
Yeah. I
if
mean, a
something
good,
had gone wrong, I could have gone to the
yeah.
hospital, and and I had a car there available. I could have been bundled into that and taken to the hospital. But she arrived, she arrived at 5 o'clock, and I didn't have Gabriel until 1:20. There was plenty of time. I think that
Yeah.
she, it, I think a lot of women, especially at first births, think that when their contractions are further away, that it's more of an emergency. But actually, the body has a pacing. The body has a way of, doing it,
Oh,
doing
yeah.
it
I mean,
slowly.
24 hours is very normal for
Yeah,
a
for a first birth.
first time
Yeah,
labor,
exactly.
because every every bone that's moving and all those everything it's all happening for the first
Yeah,
time,
exactly,
you know.
exactly.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And I know the midwives I've had, certainly I can say almost just one word to them
Mm.
unrelated to birth over the phone, and by the sound of my voice, they know
Mhm.
where I'm
Yeah,
at.
yeah.
Or I've heard husbands say, like, yeah, if I just held the phone up and she listened to the sound my wife was making,
Yeah,
and she knew
amazing.
exactly where she was at,
Yeah,
because we do have those
I saw in my
cues.
notes that she'd written kind of signs of full dilation. She wasn't measuring me at all.
Yes.
I was never
Yeah.
measured
Yeah.
once. She was just looking at me and listening to me, and she could see that I was almost fully dilated because she's seen
Absolutely.
how many hundreds of women go through the process.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Thankfully.
I as somebody who's had a few births and then as a doula who's
Mm,
attended some births,
mm,
I'm not in the hundreds, or like both my midwives were in the
yeah,
thousands of births that
exactly.
they'd attended. But even I can tell,
Mm,
of course you never say to a mom, looks like
yeah.
there's no point in that. But you could put it in your private notes for her to
Yeah,
reflect on later.
yeah.
But yeah, you can definitely tell. So
Mm.
that's wonderful.
So let's talk about your births.
Okay, so similar in a lot of regards to yours, but
Hmm.
not the same. So it's going to be interesting to see how we bounce off of each other.
Mm,
And so, as you alluded to, slightly different history for me in that my mom has 8 children,
mm,
and the first four of us were born in hospital, and the second half were born at
mm.
home.
Okay.
And so for me, my earliest, if I reach back in my mind, I have two early memories. One is putting magnet letters on a board with my sister, and the other is my dad laying me and my sister in our jackets down on the bed when my little sister was born.
Gosh.
So he must have brought us home and laid us down in bed.
Mm,
My mom, I believe, was still at the hospital because that baby was a preemie and stayed in there a little bit longer.
mhm,
But and my mom, knowing what she knows now, she would have done that differently. I should
mm,
caveat that by saying.
mm.
But so I must have only my sister and I are only 18 months apart, so
Wow.
I wasn't that old. But anyways, um, when I got pregnant, I don't know, I just figured I'd have a home birth. And it's funny because I remember there were stretches of time growing up where like you, um, I had this exposure to Hollywood birth, and I was like, "Oh my
Mm,
gosh, this just looks terrible.
mm,
Like, what a horrible time. I hope they could just give me a drug and black me out and then wake me up and give me a baby later, you
mm.
know?" And that's all when I was young. And then when I, actually was pregnant, then I just I don't know, I just felt like, everybody keep your hands off. I don't want
Yeah.
anybody getting in this space. And I only told my parents. I actually didn't tell anybody else because I knew that negative comments would just start filtering in. And it wasn't going to change my mind, but I didn't want them setting up camp in my head, if that
Yeah,
makes
no,
sense.
completely. I understand that.
Okay, yes. And I also didn't start intentionally going out and doing a ton of research on reading horror stories and birth stories and things like that. I actually was very intentional. I would read through blogs or books, and
Mm.
I would only read the home birth
Yeah.
um, stories. And yeah, some negative stuff popped up from time to time, but I just would walk away from it basically. And I felt like very deeply trusting that, oh, very nice. Um, the information I needed would come to me if I needed it.
Yeah.
And okay, can you take her over to the couch? Good girl. Speaking of children, I have some right here. They're up early because the coyotes were like howling
Oh,
like
okay.
crazy last night and woke the kids up. Um, yeah, he did. He did, and it scared them away, huh? I know. Can you go lay on the couch with Camille? Good girl. Anyway, we were living in California at the time that I got pregnant,
Mhm.
and I didn't take a pregnancy test. I just, at some point, started to realize, this much throwing up wasn't
Mm,
normal,
mm.
even for me. And um, I just knew I was pregnant, and Gary was like, "We should take a pregnancy test," and I was like, "Yeah, but why?" I kept saying, "I mean, if I am pregnant, eventually we'll find
Yeah.
out, right?" Like,
Yeah. Mhm.
and I remember even I biked to the store one time, and I went and I was like, "Fine, maybe I'll take one." And I looked at them and they're $18, and I was like, "I'm not taking one."
Mm-mm.
Never mind. And then, at some point when we were gonna come back up, can you go take that over to the couch, please? When we were gonna come back up to Washington State, and get Gary ready to move to his next duty station,
Mhm.
then he said, "Well, it's free if you go to the doctor's office and they can give you a pregnancy test. And can you please just do that so we know you don't have like a tumor or
Mm,
something?"
mm.
So I was like, fine. So, and I would say that taking, peeing into a cup and then handing it to someone and having them, dip a thing into it is not necessarily invasive. But I will say any decision I made during any of my pregnancies that I regretted was only made because somebody else pressured me to do it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't necessarily say Gary was pressuring me to do it. Um, but any any decisions I made that I regret was the input of someone
Yeah.
else that for whatever reason in that moment I was unable to resist.
Yeah. I get that.
I don't know if you feel the same way, but I
I
kind of
felt
picked
that
up on that.
about the Doppler thing, you know. Everything else,
Yeah.
I made decisions and I was in integrity and I felt like I was owning my space. You know, I really felt my
Yes.
body and the home and my relationship with Rob. And just there was this pressure from the midwife
Hmm.
to do the heartbeat thing. And it was such a little thing,
Yeah.
but it was that, like you said, outside pressure. Whereas my myself, my body, my spirit seemed to
Right.
know what was right for it.
Yep. Yeah. I would totally agree with that. And Gary really didn't give me any pressure to do things. He pretty much, like I said, just trusted and never questioned. And when I said I wanted to do home birth, he said, okay.
Mm.
Um, but um, yeah, so that was just something I've reflected on since the births because I do have a couple of regrets, and they
Mm.
all were from somebody else.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, me not being able to say no.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um, I was 24 when I got pregnant with Jacob, so I was pretty
So
young.
that's really
Not
different to
not
me.
ancestrally, I should have been like 14, I suppose, when I had my first, but for today in America, that would be considered young.
Mm.
Um, and I was very healthy, which is good. Um, I was outside riding my bike or, walking to the beach or doing yoga, going to classes every single day. And I never stopped during the pregnancy, I just continued on with all my fitness activities as normal, including going to my 90-minute hot yoga classes.
Mm-hmm.
And people said, "Oh my gosh, should you? Should you not?" And there's people on both sides of the coin of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I would say ultimately, you have to be very, very honest with yourself constantly about how you feel. And if you're not feeling good, not pushing yourself to do something because it's what you always do. Um, I don't know if that was similar to you, but kind of with your walking, it sounded kind of like that.
Yeah,
Like,
I wanted to move more, and I
mhm.
remember doing a lot of research to find a swimming pool that didn't have chlorine in it to treat it. And I
Oh,
found
yeah,
one
so hard.
at a posh school that was in the area that was treated with ozone rather than chlorine. And the only way I could get to
Uh-huh.
swim in it was to join a class. So I joined a class, and I went once a week to swim, and it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I
That
loved
is
it.
great.
And afterwards, Gable was always really quiet for about like 4 hours. I think it must have sent him to sleep, all the kind of motion of the pelvis and me moving around. But I loved swimming. I
Uh-huh.
loved swimming. It was just that
Oh, yeah.
thing of being weightless and having the water around me. It felt really supportive during the pregnancy.
Yeah, I love that. And I do wonder, reading Katie Bowman's book, if I pushed if if I contributed to my diastasis recti
Mm.
by doing so much
Mm.
physical labor, since she talks about the forces and things like
Mm.
that. Um, but also I don't know that not doing
Yeah,
anything would have been any
yeah,
better. So it's just one of those things.
yeah.
I have no control me, so I can't compare. But overall, it was excellent. I would agree with you that I very much enjoyed being pregnant. I was quite sick a lot,
Mm.
but that didn't really deter me from doing things. And Gary and I were apart for most of the pregnancy because he was in the Navy at the time.
Mm.
So um, then when I was in Washington State, I was staying with family. And I think this is where my single biggest regret comes from
Mm.
during my pregnancy, is that I wasn't going to move to where we were living until about 37 weeks, when we were going to move to the state of Virginia,
Mm.
named for one of your queens. Um, and um, everybody around me kept saying, "Wait, you're not going to see anyone at all until 37 weeks?" And I had no problem with it. I was
Mm.
like, "Yeah, why? What are they going to tell me?" Kind of like you said, I knew
Yeah.
they'll say, if something's wrong, well, you can either take the life of your child, which I didn't want to do,
Mm.
or just wait it out, which was what I was going to do anyways.
Yeah.
So I was like, what's the point? So, um, this is where my regret comes from, is everybody pushed and pushed and pushed and said, you really should just have an appointment with somebody here just to make sure everything's okay. And then, and I did, and I still can't even think about that appointment without feeling
Oh
traumatized.
gosh.
So I regret doing that very deeply. Because she also, I don't know where my voice was, but the woman that I went to see pushed me to come in for um, an ultrasound, which I was adamant that I wasn't going to do.
Mm.
And then I don't, honestly, looking back, I think I memory wiped because I don't even remember the conversation, how she got me in there. And I think about that and I'm like, if how I feel and how I felt and not in labor was manipulated like that,
Mm.
how in the blazes is a woman,
Mm.
at 8.5 centimeters on
Yeah.
hour
Yeah.
22 of her labor supposed to stand up to 7 male doctors coming in
Yeah.
and telling her something? Like, it's not even possible. Um, I guess the only thing that I could say positive is that, or learning wise for me, was that when I went to that horrible traumatizing appointment, I brought my mom
Mm.
because I was starting to realize how voiceless I was.
Mm.
And I asked my mom to come with me, and the lady hated my mom because the lady would say, "Well, why don't I do this?" And my mom was like, "Why do you need to do that?" And she
Mm.
was like, yes. Um, and then the lady would say to me, "Do you wanna do this?" And my mom would say, "Does she need to do that?" You know? And so, I'm grateful that my mom spared me any more trauma than was necessary, but I do still regret that.
Good on your mum, I
Um,
say. I feel like
yeah.
um, that that was one of the reasons why I didn't want to go to the hospital, because I thought if we stay in Italy and I go to the hospital,
Yeah.
if I'm in intense labour and someone is saying something in a language which I have to try and figure out what they're saying because it's not my native language and I'm not fluent,
Oh,
add
dear,
that
yeah.
onto being pressured into making a decision in
Mm-mm.
an environment that you're not
Mhm.
familiar with. I just thought I could anything could happen. I don't know if I could be strong enough to resist and not be able to say yes to something. And so it felt really extra important for me to not
Mm.
be forced to be in that environment, to do anything that I could to not be in that
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah. And I don't know that I necessarily consciously thought, well, if I go to a hospital, they're just gonna put a chain around my neck and yank me around. But I could see now that that's what would have happened.
Mm.
And I am grateful that I avoided it. Um, it is true though, when I've attended hospital births, which I should say that I made the decision a few maybe 5 years ago. I said I won't attend any more hospital
Hmm.
births. I cannot. I just can't be complicit, and women are asking me to go into the hospital with them to protect them from
Yeah,
what they're going into the hospital and
yeah.
choosing, and I was like, "Why? I cannot stand between you and the establishment you chose and signed things away to.
Mm.
There's nothing I can do. Don't ask me to do that."
Mm.
But, um they phrase things, and my mom warned me about this, but she said they'll phrase things and say, "Hey, what we're gonna do now is just check on baby and do this." And she
Mm.
said, "They're asking your permission. They're getting your consent." You say, "Oh, okay," but it doesn't sound like they're asking your
I see.
permission.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're telling you. And it's true. They do that all the time. They say, "Hey, we're gonna turn this up or turn this down or put this on or take this off." And the mom just goes, "Oh, okay.
Okay.
Ah, I had no
Yeah.
idea." Or they look at me and they're like, "Should I do it?" And I'm like, "You can't ask me for medical advice. I told you before we came in here that this was gonna happen."
Yeah.
But anyways, um, that if I could erase that one moment, then everything else of the pregnancy and the birth was absolutely perfect and uninterrupted and unimpeded. When I did finally go, I think I only had maybe 2 appointments with my midwife before I went. She asked me if we wanted to do a home birth class, and there really wasn't enough time to join one. You know how they take 5 weeks or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and she's still a friend of mine. And she still always says, "Oh, if you have another baby, I want to fly to Washington." But she came to the house and did one with us, and it was wonderful because she thinks like we do, and she showed us she had these amazing pictures showing, "Here's how the baby looks sitting inside of mom," and then she was like, "And then dad, you wanna see what happens to mom's organs when baby's in there? This is why she's uncomfortable. Look, where do they go?" And Gary's like, "Where are they?" And she's like, "That's the
That tiny
question."
little dot is your stomach.
Yeah. That's why I'm eating, like, 3 bites of food at a time, and then
Mm.
20 minutes later, I'm hungry
Yeah.
again.
Mm.
Newborn. But it was really great, and the labor was pretty classic. She was a lot like your midwife, it sounds like. I just kept in touch with her, so I knew from experience that, um, you know yeah, midwives don't want you to tell them, "Oh, no, come out here right now. I think I had a
Yeah.
contraction." But they do like to know when things start so they can start planning it out.
Yeah.
Like, "Okay, this mom is probably in labor." So I told her when they were kind of starting, and she kind of, Gary went to work. I just slept. I ate. We just kind of had a normal day, and then um, went into more labor that night. And she came out, and she came out, and they don't do any internal checks. Um, she used a Doppler, by the way. I
Mm.
didn't know about the Dopplers until farther down the road when with
Mm.
Adelaide, I had them use a fetoscope only
Yeah.
and the stethoscope, like you
Okay.
said. But she used a Doppler and listened and just kind of stayed out of my way. And I had told her, I really just want to be left alone. And um I'll ask for you if I
Yeah.
need you, basically. And I would say that she fulfilled that exactly. She wasn't even in the same room as me when I was laboring for the most part. Um, and I think, as you described, also midwives can be a really good midwife. I have rarely encountered doctors like men who do this.
Mm.
So I don't know if it's the difference between men and women, or if it's just the establishment setting versus the home or whatever, but they're really good at coming in and keeping their energetic presence completely, like, inert's not the right word, but
Mm.
they don't disrupt your wavelength. They're
Mm.
really good at that.
Mm.
A good midwife is. And so she came in, and then, like, she kind of had like a conversation with Gary, and then we would be in one room and she'd be in another room
Mm.
knitting or whatever.
Mm.
um, and it was awesome. She would come in, and Gary would ask her questions, and they'd sometimes have a conversation, um, or she would ask me if maybe I could eat something, because she would notice that it had been a while or
Mm.
whatever. But she really just stayed out of the way, which I loved. And then I asked for more interaction from her when I was actually pushing. And it was not hypnobirth, but
Mhm.
I would say similar, like, since there's no checks, like, okay, okay, like, okay, you're fully dilated. Can you try to push now?
Yeah.
Midwives, good ones, they just listen and let you follow your body cues. And I should also say that that means, oftentimes moms push before they're fully
Yeah.
dilated,
Yeah.
which is also okay and can help open the cervix. But you will never hear that in a hospital setting.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, it was pretty wonderful. I would say the labor length was pretty standard, like pre-labor, and then active labor was probably 8 hours, but pre-labor, that
Yeah.
feels like active later labor. My mom
Yeah.
has this saying where she says, there's no such thing as a false contraction. She says if somebody calls it a false contraction, they've never had one.
Yeah.
She says every contraction is doing work. They aren't all necessarily active labor,
Yeah.
but they're not false.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Totally.
yeah, she interacted with me more when I was pushing, and I asked her, I said, like, I wanted to go just into my headspace, and I said, "Can you, like, tell me?" I didn't even know if I could feel the contractions anymore, but she could see them, and so she would say, like, "All right, you can breathe in." And she never screamed or yelled at me, and she didn't really tell me, "Push, push," or anything like
Mm.
that. I just asked for some guidance, and she was willing to give that, which was great.
That's lovely.
Um, so yeah, I remember I birthed Jacob in the squatting position,
Mhm.
and I remember I was looking straight out our back window, and I remember saying, "Does somebody mind closing the window?" Because I could just picture our neighbors walking by and being, "Oh my gosh, hello." Yeah, and then the placenta probably came about 40 minutes later. My placentas usually take about 40 minutes.
Mm.
Um, and my midwife is big on not yanking on the placenta.
Mhm.
Um, so when I moved from the floor to kind of sit on the bed and hold the baby, and then this is just, I guess, a funny anecdote of birth, but um the placenta wasn't kind of birthed for a while, and then she said, "I think it's just right here. It just isn't contracting out." So she just said,
I see.
"Would you want to try standing and see if it came out?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great." So we had like a plastic sour cream tub or something,
Mm.
and she kind of held that under me, and I stood up and it, like, just fell out, and like hit the bowl, like blood splattered everywhere. I remember Gary, like, turning his head. He's sitting next to me, holding the baby skin to skin, and he just turned his blood, like, splattered on him, and I didn't realize until ages later that it also splattered on the
Oh
wall,
dear.
and I don't think we cleaned it off until we left, because we didn't notice it for a long time,
Mm.
and then we're like, "Ah, it's a memento." Gary's like, "Yeah, I wonder what somebody would say if they came in and saw this." So that was kind of fun. But it was really wonderful. I really loved those midwives. It was a midwife and an apprentice that came. And then at Camille's birth,
Mm.
then they were both certified. But if somebody wants to read Camille's birth, it's on my blog, Farm and Hearth. It's called
Oh.
Camille's Borning, a
So
true
how
story.
many years after Jacob was Camille?
He turned 3, maybe 2 weeks after she was born.
Okay. And then
So
Adelaide,
they're
how much later was
pretty close to
she?
3. She's, I want to say 2.5 years
Okay.
after Camille.
So you were like 30 when Adelaide was born?
Yep, I was 30 when she was
Okay.
born. Yep.
Okay. And were those births particularly different?
Nope.
So
They just got faster and better.
yeah, that's what happened.
I got it down to like a 2-hour process now.
That's what happened with my sister. By her third one, that horrible first birth, by her third one, basically the thing just came out. You know? She got her clothes off and
Love it.
went to get in they had a birthing pool by then at the hospital, went to get in the birthing pool and James, her son, just came out. Just like that.
I love it. With Camille's birth was remarkable, and if somebody wants to read the timeline or what you want to say why I'm saying it's remarkable on the blog, they can. But I remember specifically saying I was teaching yoga at like 3 or 4 different studios at the time when I was pregnant with her, and people asked me, how long are you going to teach yoga during pregnancy? And I said, because I love teaching yoga, I said up to the last minute. And my water broke in Shavasana on my last class. So, and it was interesting because I taught the class and I know now I was in very active labor. Because the contractions were so strong and so close, I would give the direction for a pose and but I'm telling you, Allison, the best way to labor is nobody knows you're in labor because you really cope really well then. And then I literally couldn't even speak. I would just have to breathe. And I couldn't like touch anyone during the contraction because it took basically all my energy just to focus on the contraction. And then I would give the direction. It was just really the right pacing. I would give the direction for the next pose. And I remember there was a mom and a daughter visiting Virginia at that time. They came to the class just as a guest from out of town. And they came back later and told the studio owner, this was the highlight of our trip because everybody was like, how far along are you? And I was like, I'm basically done, you know? And I actually had the inkling, kind of like you said, I thought Camille was going to be born that day because Gary was in these training classes and I'd asked him what would be the best day to have the baby. And he had said that day. So I was like, okay,
following orders.
Yeah. Cause he couldn't not be at the training classes, you know, he was in the Navy. It wasn't really like he had options. So, yeah, so it worked out that way. But I remember I just had this intuition. As everybody, I mean, obviously I was contracting, but everybody was in Shavasana and I usually just sit quietly and wait for Shavasana, but I rolled up my mat. I put all my own blocks away and then I just sat on my mat at the front of the class until they were done. And then it kind of said, thank you very much, namaste. And then I got up and I walked to the studio door and the next teacher was already there to start checking her students in. I opened the door and I said to her, my water broke. And the second I said it, my water broke. I still don't know why I said it. But I opened the door, I said, my water broke. And then my water broke. So when I drove home, I remember thinking, well, Jacob's labor was pretty long. Like this could be another day, I had no idea how I would do the second, but I remember then I thought, I'll look at the clock and I'll time these. I actually called my mom. And she said to me later, she's like, I do not know how you were driving. But I timed them and I was like, oh, they are like 4 minutes apart and a couple minutes long, or they're pretty strong. And I remember stopping to let someone cross the street and I could barely smile and wave. Like I wanted to show good manners, but I was like, I was having such a powerful contraction in that moment. And then when I drove to the house, I started to like back my car and then I was like, actually, I can't do this. I'm just going to leave it on the side of the road and let Gary park it. And he did, and he had called the midwife. I'd called the midwife too.
Okay.
And she had said, I was like, Gary was like, should I come home? And I was like, it's fine. We probably have like hours and hours. You should just finish your work day. And then he said, he was like, yeah, when you said that, I just got in my car and came home.
Yeah. Good plan.
But yeah, I was in bed with the baby, under 2 hours later.
So because you've seen a lot of births being a doula, you must have seen women whose partners were more skeptical than Rob
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
Gary.
Yeah.
So what, Zara asked, what advice would we give to people whose partners are skeptical about a
Yeah.
natural pregnancy and home birthing or free birthing? What would you say to that?
Kind of a tough one. Well,
Mm.
for the most part, the couples I see now, they're not a, you know, random selection at this
Yeah.
point. They're um, people who are now in a natural birth space. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So oh, nice. Jacob's showing me something. Um, but I talk to a ton of people about birth.
Mm.
And initially, my tongue in cheek response was always, well, tell him you'll birth this baby at home. And then when he births the next one, he can do wherever he wants. That's my tongue in cheek response. But that's kind of too flippant and it doesn't take into account, that he may have fears and this is his child too, even though it's
Yeah.
coming through the portal of you. So that's not really the answer I give anymore.
Mm.
Um, I would say that it's worth taking both into account because also if he's desperately paranoid, that is going to start wearing off on
Yes.
you. Um, and so to just say, well, I'm going to ignore your full blown panic attacks and just do what I want, that might not be a good situation for you either. Um, I honestly, I would get him to talk to another dad that has had a good home birth experience, but also that men, I don't know, they tend to be the ones who are more afraid almost 100% of the time in my
Mm.
experience. Women, like, there's women and men who are both afraid, but there's, I would say, in my experience, the proportion then of couples where the man is afraid and the woman is not is higher,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, that
Um,
does make sense because, it's
yeah.
completely unknown for men. They don't have that bodily
Yeah.
intuition or wisdom. They don't have, eh, for a lot of men, women's bodies are a complete mystery, full stop. So it's just,
Right.
it's a
Right.
huge
Right.
extension of that. And of course, if they've seen the Hollywood stuff, well, who blamed them for feeling like that, It's
Hmm.
not depicted, birth
Yeah.
is not depicted
And it's
well.
kind of like people's fear of flying. There's this disproportionate bias. And I don't mean because of the extras or something. I mean, because people are like, well, I saw this horrible plane crash on TV. And I don't know, Gary comes home from like 30 car crashes a day,
Mm.
right? But nobody's publicizing
Yeah.
that because it's, nobody. So people are like, oh, I heard about this horrible birth. And you're like, yeah,
One.
sure. But that completely is disproportionate. Um, and, and it is, I don't know if you've had many conversations with people about their births, but the number of women who, um, I mean, we're talking grievously traumatized from what would be
Mm.
considered a normal hospital
Mm.
birth, and women are walking away feeling raped, like
Mm.
medically raped, and they're feeling disconnected to their baby. They're feeling like the regret I feel over that one decision, they feel it
Mm.
about thousands of things. They feel manipulated,
Mm.
they feel had, they felt like they were led around by the nose. Um, it's a lot of women
I
who feel that.
I because I was living in the house of Rob's mum during the last kind of 5 months of my pregnancy, and obviously birthed in the house of Rob's mum. It came up, about Rob's birth and just how awful
Oh
Rob's mum
no.
found it. She went to hospital and
Yeah.
she just had the normal hospital treatment, and she was
Mhm.
really expecting it to be a horrendous experience for me. That's why she was standing by with the car ready to go
Mhm.
to the hospital. And I remember her telling me afterwards, I was convinced this was not going to go very well. And then I heard you
Oh my.
cry out, scream, I guess. That's when I was just about to give birth. That's when I actually made a noise. And she was upstairs for the whole process. She kept herself really scarce. And she heard that noise when I was about to give birth, and she thought, oh, now it's really started. She's really gonna, she's just about to go into hours and hours and hours of, painful screaming.
Wow.
Whereas Gabriel was born within like a minute. And then she heard Gabriel crying, and she was just like, what? One
my God,
cry out loud.
Chills.
And then a baby. She just thought I was then in for 12 hours of crying out, because that's how Rob's birth was, and
yeah.
and
well, I mean, even so short time ago, then as when Rob was born, think about the birth practices. I mean, that was an entire generation of women who were taught not to breastfeed.
Yeah.
Our parents.
Yeah.
Now, I will say my mom breastfed all of us, and my entire childhood. I think that contributed to my breastfeeding experiences. I really do, and my sisters also, because I don't have really any memory of a day where mom wasn't sitting on the couch nursing a baby. It was, and I remember the midwife asked me, now, what are your plans for, breastfeeding? And, have you done any reading on it? And I was like, what? It's like if somebody came to you and said, now, have you done any research on going to the bathroom? And do you feel comfortable using the toilet paper? And you're like, why are you asking me? I'm so confused. Like, doesn't everyone just do it?
That's just amazing. My breastfeeding story is a whole nother episode needed to cover that. But
that is a worthy story.
Before, well, whilst I was pregnant, because I was bottle fed, and I just me and my mum don't talk about anything like that, and I didn't have any experience really breastfeeding. So I went to I don't know if you have the La Leche League, but there's a kind of a breastfeeding,
we do.
And I went to like 3 or 4 of their meetings around where we were during that time, 6, 7, 8 months pregnant, to watch people breastfeeding, to learn about it. I read books. I did absolutely everything to try and understand how I could best breastfeed to Gabriel, because I didn't have that. Like you saw it. It was just a routine thing, like you said, like going to the loo.
Right.
But for me, it was like foreign territory.
Right. And I grew up in a church where there was lots of families, and we went to baby showers, we went to wedding showers, we went to parties, homeschool gatherings. There was always like 3 moms, 4 moms in church nursing, moms sitting at the dining room table nursing, like everybody was nursing. So it didn't seem abnormal. And I remember we talked about this on the Big Families episode, where I was saying how, in the context of a big family, the continuum never stops, because then my little sister was 7 when I had my kids. And so she grew up seeing me nursing, and then my sisters, so hopefully normalized it, because it is normal. But that's not to say, like, with your experience, that there aren't exceptions, because there certainly are exceptions, but that's what defines normal. Is that usually it goes a certain way, and then sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, completely.
I wonder if I've thought about this, Allison. If the let's see, how do I say this? So people say, but is it, when we're talking about moms being traumatized and things like that, and people are like, yeah, but isn't the most important thing that mom and baby are healthy? And that is, of course, a paramount feature. And that is actually why we gravitate towards natural birth, because natural birth has higher odds of securing that outcome of a healthy mother and baby. But I was thinking, if the only reason was just to desperately ensure that by a medical standard, everybody's alive, then a society could easily reach a point where the only way you were, like you said, that midwife in Italy said, I legally have to induce you at 42 weeks. And it's actually the same in Washington state. Although I won't name any names, but there's plenty of midwives who don't. But it is the same thing here. And I just knew that if somebody said that, I would just cancel the care and free birth on my own. So it didn't really concern me. But you can sign away everything else, but you still have to sign it away. Like, I decline the GBS, I decline the everything. I
Mm.
declined everything. I decline internal checks. I decline this, I decline that, Um, wouldn't we then reach a point where legally, because it's the safest and safety is the thing option, you can only have a baby that's produced in a test tube? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like manufactured somewhere because it is better. But I feel like we need to acknowledge that there's other biological needs being served
definitely.
in birth than just our two people with a heart beating standing there at the end of the day. Um, Again, I don't want to underestimate the value of that, obviously.
I've got to.
And I am grateful for when.
Mm.
Hmm,
I was going to say I've got two things to say about what you just said.
okay, let's hear it.
So the first one is just like, do you want it to just happen and ensure survival? Is you see the parallel with food? I mean, we could just all eat
I
Soylent
agree.
Green. We could all
Yes,
eat a
I
tablet. We
do.
could all just eat,
Yes,
meat
Soylent
created in
Green.
a
Take your
laboratory
pill.
and then just inject it. Might as well just do that and get on with our lives. Or, and
Yeah.
what we lose with that, the connection, we lose the sensuality, we lose the sitting around the table, we lose the creating the food, the love, that just
Oh, but you could, but
many
what about the
things.
safety, Allison? What if you ate what you craved and you were low on vitamin A? It's not good for you. What if you weren't getting enough of this and that? We could make if safety is the only, and I agree with you on the food thing. If that's the only thing that matters, then there really is no basis for anything other than, the Soylent
Yeah,
Green pill or tablet
completely.
or whatever.
The question
You know,
is, what type of life do I want to live? I don't want to have a life where I'm
yes.
taking tablets or injecting food or eating Soylent Green. I want a life where I go to my farmer and I see where the animals are and I see what he's got and I bring the stuff home and I think, how am I going to cook this? And I play with it and I make it nice and I'm smelling it and I'm tasting it and I sit at the table and I've got variety and I've got
Yes.
texture. I don't want the life out of the bottle. And I feel like it's the same, or it feels to me the same with birthing and with pregnancy. That
Profoundly so.
experience of being pregnant and birthing absolutely and completely changed me as a woman, and it was everything. It was
Yes, I
high, it was
agree.
low, it was the sensuality, it was the psychological change, it was the actual
Hmm.
process of the
Oh yeah.
birthing, it was my relationship with
Your
Rob,
body, your
it was my
brain changed.
body,
Yeah.
it was everything. And I choose that rather than going into the hospital and making it, or even putting in a
Yeah.
test tube, and that's not life.
Hmm.
That's just some kind of weird
No.
science fiction, that
Yeah.
George Orwell could have
Which is
written.
becoming less science fiction every day and
More
more science
science, yeah,
nonfiction,
exactly.
which is terrifying because I agree that I see the parallels in food and many other things. I mean, we
Mm,
just went through
mm,
2.5 years of people
yeah, mm,
handing over any and relationships with a 95-year-old who was dying. They
mm,
handed it over in the name of possible safety.
yeah,
And they said, I'll let that person die alone.
mm,
Like horrible things have happened throughout history in the name of safety. I don't know if anybody who's listening, or if you, Allison, if you've read The Giver by Lois Lowry,
no,
um, but if this topic interests anybody, it's a short fiction book. I read it when I was a kid, and I just read it again recently, and it made. I mean, food features in there. And I mean, it's a very profound book, and the author has said, out of all the books she's ever written, 90% of her mail comes to her about that book because it shook us all to the core. And I remember how vividly it just shook me. I think I was probably 13 when I read it, and I was like, this cannot be.
mm,
But they addressed this issue
mm,
in a very beautifully written, very simple um, story. I mean, it's really, really wonderful. But that's kind of the context. Like, what is the point then? I mean, if we can make an engineered society where everybody lives in some kind of a high rise and has their nutrient quota delivered by drone, why would you need anything
yeah,
else? Does that not satisfy the needs of the species?
mm. There's more
We
to us
become
than
those
that, isn't there?
chickens
Um,
in the factory
What
farm.
we've still got one question that I want to address directly from Zara, which was
Mhm.
books and articles. So from my perspective,
Oh, yeah.
I would say hypnobirthing was an amazing resource for me, and all of the stuff that
Uh-huh.
comes along with that is worth investigating and reading other people's home birthing stories. There are people who put together books that you can get ebooks with home birthing stories.
Mhm.
If you're not familiar with home birthing, or if you want to do free birthing, find some stories about free birthing.
Yeah.
I feel like learning from other women is a wonderful thing, particularly if you come from an environment like me where it wasn't normal.
Mhm.
Is there anything in particular you
Yeah.
would say that you would point people to read, Andrea?
Yeah. Grant Leduc Reed wrote Childbirth Without Fear, I think in the 40s. That's good.
Hmm.
Um, Ina May Gaskin is
Yeah,
always really
yeah.
encouraging to me.
Mm.
Um, I'm trying to think what else. Ricky Lake wrote this book called Your Best Birth. And this could be helpful for you and a partner if you're trying to make the decision, because in a very non-judgmental and very humorous way, she goes through basically your options from I don't remember if free birth is in there. It might just be like if she's talking to women who want an attendant. Um, but a home birth with a midwife, birth center, a birth center attached to
Hmm.
a hospital, a C-section.
Hmm.
And she gives you lists of questions you could ask the provider because, again, not if unless you've been to 30 births in 30 different contexts, you might not know that you can go to a childbirth center attached to a hospital and they won't tell you. You're like, oh, I'm at a birth center. You're not at a birth center. You're in a hospital that's dressed up to look like
Yeah,
a birth center, and it will follow the rules of the
yeah.
hospital and you'll be subject to the rules of the hospital. It's not a birth center unless it's an independent, freestanding, completely separate,
Mm.
birth center that has nothing to do with the hospital. And they'll say to you something like, "This is why it's useful to have the list of questions." And she phrases them very specifically
Hmm.
because you can say, "Hey, do you have birthing balls?" And she'll say, "Yes, we do." And then when you get there, you say, "I really want that birthing ball." And she goes, "I'm sorry, both of them are with other moms right now." And you're like,
Yeah,
"What?" Or you could say, "Is there a tub for birthing?" And she's like, "Why, yes, there is." And they'll even show you the room with the tub. And then you get there and you're like, "I need to
yeah,
get in the tub." And they'll say, "Sorry, there's another
yeah,
mom in that
yeah.
room. You need this closet." And people don't realize this, but that's why the questions are helpful. So that's a good book. And I remember I haven't watched it probably since 2009, but so I don't know if it's still something I'd recommend or not, but I remember The Business of Being Born was helpful because it gave a lot of statistics about the safety, um, like the history and why women are choosing to birth outside of the hospital now.
Hmm.
There might be there's some births in there, like on video. One of my friends is actually in there. My friend Haley, her birth is in there. Um, so that might be helpful in terms of video. And
Okay.
then, yeah, I would just reach out to moms and ask for
Yeah,
positive birth stories, but be very careful because people say, "Oh, let me tell you my
yeah.
horrible
They
birth
want
story."
to.
And I will tell you too that a lot of those horrible birth stories are constructed by the hospital. And you might think I'm exaggerating, except for the fact that one of my friends who's a doula she'd always gone to home births, and she attended one of her friends' partners was too afraid to do the home birth, so they opted for a hospital birth. And my friend called me at like 5 a.m. the next day, or she messaged me and she said, "I am so traumatized. This was the worst night of my life. I have to call you later today and tell you what happened." And I texted her back and I said, "Let me guess. This happened. Then they said this.
Mm.
Then this happened." And I gave her the timeline and she texted me back. She was like, "Oh my gosh, how did you know? That's exactly what happened." And I was like, "Because it's the timeline.
Yeah.
It happens every time."
Mm.
Like, I knew what happened at the birth before she even told me because it's predictable. The interventions, I knew exactly which ones had happened, and I knew exactly where it led mom's body, and I knew where she ended up, which was in a C-section.
Mm. Mm.
And so, yeah, if somebody's telling you, yeah, they have a timeline or an agenda that they want to push and they're going to get you on it, and who knows where you'll stop, but this is where it ends up. I'm not exaggerating about that. Like, it is true.
Mm.
And it left that mom horrifically
I'm not
traumatized.
surprised. I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a huge, like, two ends of the scale between, a birth like that and a birth that could be done at home
Hmm.
or free birth. Rob and I won't have any more children, even though we would have loved to have had more children. It's something that we've
Uh-huh.
discussed many times, and it's we're very, very, very grateful to have Gabriel, considering I wasn't, I didn't have a cycle for 5 years, and Rob and I kind of met when we did. We didn't get together until I was a bit older. But I feel like,
Right.
birth can be a beautiful, empowering, gorgeous thing. And
Right.
it requires, or for me, it required really dedication on each day of my pregnancy and following what my body was telling me to do and shutting out, like you've said many times in this recording, shutting out what you don't want to hear. It's similar in life. If
Yeah.
you want to surround
Yes.
yourself with people who are
Absolutely.
negative and are telling you can't start your own business or you can't do this or you can't do that,
Yeah.
well, you're going to be dragged
Yeah.
down by them. It's the same with
You
birth.
start to absorb that.
And so,
You become.
exactly, it's possible
Mm.
to shut all that out and help yourself towards the reality that you want to happen. And if you can, it can be one of the most wonderful experiences of your life. I think I've said that a lot now.
I agree. But it is transformative. And they say, every pregnancy you have, the baby actually leaves some of their own, I don't know what the right word is, tissue maybe,
Mm,
in your body, in your brain. Like it
mm,
actually changes a mother's brain. Like you literally change. I know people say it's going from maiden to woman,
mm,
but you literally transform. Your brain changes.
mm,
And I know people say, I don't want to lose my identity by having
mm,
a child. Um, but you aren't a maiden anymore.
mm,
You aren't, you know, um, even if even if you carried a pregnancy and the baby didn't come
mm,
full term or um, maybe passed,
mm,
you're still a mother. Your
mm,
body knows that.
mm,
You have changed.
mm. I feel like
And
that's a whole nother discussion as well that I'd like to have with you at some point, because I feel like
yeah,
I
that would
was
be amazing.
terrified of losing my identity during pregnancy. I
Hmm.
built up this business as a life coach, and then it was all
Yeah.
kind of in Italy, and then I was suddenly back in the UK, and I was determined to carry on with that business. And then the first year of Gabriel's birth, the business just everything, it
Right.
didn't implode, but it a year later, the business didn't exist anymore. I let go of the entire thing, and I
Right.
was in Rob's mum's lean-to on the side of the house painting, which I'd never done before at all. And I
Uh-huh.
remember feeling very, very bewildered and lost after the birth, because it's just such a huge change. And I remember realizing just how much I loved Gabriel and Rob and how
Hmm.
mortal they were, and how
Yeah.
if they weren't around anymore, what it would do to me. It
Yeah.
shook my kind of sense of who I was. And a
Absolutely.
year later, I changed psychologically, but actually, what was around me had changed. I'd let go of a business which I'd spent
Hmm.
the previous like 6-7 years building, and
Yeah.
it really does change you. And
Yeah.
it's a really interesting rite of passage, that whole area of kind of identity shift,
Yeah.
and
I
fascinating.
wonder if that's part of why it is often bewildering and challenging, for one, because our society pushes us to have kids older and older,
Mm.
which sometimes just happens because you don't find the right partner.
Yeah.
You know, that can happen. That can be part of it. And then we're also told a lot of times, live your entire life, do everything you
Mm.
ever wanted to do before you ever
Yeah.
have a child. And having that imprint happen earlier and younger is probably easier in a way
Mm. I think you're probably
you know,
right.
because you have, it's just like, you know, when two people meet at the age of 50 and get married, they're so set in their ways that it's harder to adapt than, I'm not saying that
Yeah.
they should have, but like if they met when they were 20,
Yeah.
you know, and they hadn't really gotten set in their ways and they set their ways together. So I think that can play a part. And then also the fact that our society does not acknowledge that being a parent changes you.
Yeah.
Girls, can you go back upstairs?
Yeah, I mean,
Take it
the
upstairs and plug it
support
in.
for mums, I mean, you think about how it would have been and how it is still in some parts of the world that are just about still there, where the
Yeah.
sisters are there, the aunts are there, the mums are there, the grandmas are there.
Yeah.
They're all experiencing it together. They're living together. They're close together. There's support all the way through. And now the isolated societies and kind of bricks and mortar we live in, away from people, just a woman is not supposed to be pregnant and birthing and in the early days of her bringing up her children on her own. She's just not supposed to be. And so you see why postnatal depression is such a exaggerated, you know, is made worse by the fact that support is just not there for women in the way that we've moved society in the last couple of 100 years at all.
Yeah. Which is not to say that it didn't exist before. We certainly have documentation of that. But, you know, like with that woman all the way back in the medieval times who dictated that book, which I cannot remember the name of, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. The one who started like seeing angels and things like that. But it we offer support to the woman in the terms of how can we subsidize childcare, you know, and that has its place obviously in certain contexts, but that's really not the kind of support we need. We need nourishing food, we need rest, maybe somebody taking care of the house or the other kids while we sleep with the baby. You know, it's different than just, here, let me take the child away from you, find a way to watch the child for you so that you can go back to being you, separated from the child. And a friend of mine who, she's an amazing little lady. She just had a free birth maybe 6 months ago. And she texted me. She said, well, I went to work for like 3.5 hours today and it was so hard because I just didn't want to be away from him. And I told her, you know, that's so funny because people always say to me, you know, I would say, oh, it's so much harder to find, to go and work out or go to yoga or whatever after having a baby. And they'd say, well, you just need to make time for it. And I would say, no, it's not the time. It's that I don't want to be away from them. I'm, you know, and one of the benefits of uninterrupted birth is you have often a very deep biological connection with the baby that was never interrupted with synthetics in any way. What was that sound? But yeah, you feel very connected to the baby and hormonally connected and everything, and it is hard to be away from them.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, I think maybe we should finish. My watch says 5 o'clock. I don't know how long we've been talking.
Yeah, I think we started at 6:30, so that doesn't make any sense.
in a kind of weird parallel universe where time doesn't exist. It was really really interesting and informative. It's nice to be able to share and to hear your experiences too, Andrea. Thank you.
Yeah. Really good questions.
Thank you, Zara.
From Zara. Well phrased. And I don't know that we really answered it because I don't really know what the answer is if the partner's not on board, other than it's usually a gap in education. And that's, you know, can be hard to get them educated.
I think talking to other fathers of potential home births is a really good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Gary says that all the time. He says, you know, before I kind of wondered, but he goes, after having the first baby, he goes, I can never imagine going anywhere but having a baby at home.
Yeah. So he could talk
and
to
my dad says the same.
He could talk to another man about it.
Yep. Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm very appreciative that my parents, when I said I was having a home birth, they said, oh, thank goodness.
Oh, that's another world for me. It's like, really?
Yeah. That world exists.
It
though.
does.
It's out there.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to say let's finish there. And
all right, let's do it.
thank you very much.
Wrap it up.
And we'll put that out into the world. I think that this will go out at the beginning of January. So it's kind of a new birth for a new year.
Yeah, I love it. I love it, Allison. All right. Thank you guys for being our awesome patrons.
Yeah, we really appreciate you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Allison's at Ancestral_Kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration, and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.